Good afternoon. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. As always, we promise a robust conversation. Today will be no exception. My first guest is a friend, a colleague. I call him a young elder in the community, an elder becoming, because he's really a young guy, but he's wise, and he's a good guy for his community, for his family, a good guy for the people that he works for, and that's kind of why I asked him to come today, because he's working for a company that I think is doing a lot in terms of community support, community service, community involvement. Tommy McNeil is a sales executive with Comcast here in Twin Cities. And as a matter of disclosure, let me say that Comcast is a customer of my company, McFarlane Media Insight News. So just put that on the table so you know that, but not a supporter of this particular program. So, Tommy, first of all, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. And yourself, sir?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
You as well.
As always. You had a wonderful event this past weekend, I think, or week before last.
Yes.
That typifies the kind of spirit and heart that you and your buddies bring to the community that is also supported by your company. You talk about the mother-son event that was just held.
It was great. It was great. Thanks for asking. The mother-son gala is something that we've been putting on for about 5 years. We had close to 600 attendees, both mothers and their sons, where we had plated dinners, we had guest speakers, live entertainment, and really gave an opportunity under the umbrella of Positive Image, Minneapolis, an opportunity for mothers and sons to really build a connection during a period of time of about 4 hours. And so it was just great to see.
Why is it so important? What have you discovered in 5 years of doing this? And you do other things as well. But what you do that I think is so unique is you, with intentionality, connect generations, and you sort of celebrate the connections that we often take for granted. We often don't pay enough attention to the things that are most dear to us. And you said, look, we got to take the time and smell the roses and present the roses, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's driving you in this mission?
My partner Terry Alston and I, we spent the last 15 years really forming this organization to really focus on youth development, life skill coaching, as well as putting on events that really focus around family and building community from within the household, outside. And I think, for us, having an organization like Comcast really, supporting these types of events has been great because the community have an opportunity to really be involved and get to chance to connect with one another. And they see like-type individuals in those environments. And with all the negativity that's going on in the communities and on the airwaves these days, it's just good to be in the presence of good people.
You are I believe, consummate salesperson, sales professional. You, this is my observation, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you eat, sleep, and drink your commitment to your professional craft. Whenever I see you, your attitude is always on point, professional, courteous, and from my point of view, seeking to both serve and connect people to opportunity. Am I describing you properly? Is that okay?
I'm a humble guy, but I appreciate the compliments. I'll take it.
Okay. And so I'm interested in talking about your work career, what you do now for Comcast. I'm excited that you are an executive in the sales area at Comcast. I also am excited that when I go to the Comcast headquarters in downtown St. Paul, I see, this is my word, a gazillion black people. I see a lot of black folks working. I see people of color working, and I think that's important. And I think just like you have this passion to celebrate this connection between parents and children in our community, I have the passion to connect change, access, and positive movement in the workforce for our people. And from my point of view, Comcast is one of the companies that's doing it right. And you're there in the professional arena as selling. What do you do for Comcast?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And just so that for the record, we thank you for all the service that you've provided for us. And I know that you just recently won an award, and we're acknowledged. So I just wanted to congratulate you on that.
Well, that's the over 50 award. And my next guest, we'll talk about that a little bit. So go ahead.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what I do, I'm a market development leader.
Mm-hmm.
I am responsible for really connecting our products and services and increasing market share in the community through the product suites that we have of Xfinity. Comcast is a firm believer of connecting what's important in people's lives. And I'm fortunate to be on the front end of that through an organization within Comcast under the sales and marketing umbrella called Xfinity Communities. Mm-hmm. And so my team really supports and serve as a liaison to builders, developers, as well as property management companies.
So break that down. What does that mean?
That means that, in order to get fiber into these multi-dwelling units and these single-family subdivisions, I work with the construction team, both internally and the developers and the builders. So as these new high-rises are coming that we see in these downtown Minneapolis
mm-hmm.
area, we want to ensure that their residents, our potential customers, have the best internet connection, as well as TV solution and home automation that they can have when they move into those residences.
I'm excited that you are in the area of technology. I believe that technology obviously is critical for the future for everybody, but it's even more critical that our people are conversant in the language of technology, mm-hmm. the language of the digital world. And to see men and women like you in executive decision-making positions, I think is a wonderful thing. I think it is my job to spotlight you and your professional career choices and successes with the intent of encouraging somebody who's listening, who might be 12 years old or 13 or 15 or 18, getting this information and saying, you know what, I can be just like Tommy McNeil. Mm-hmm. He's an executive and he sounds like me and I want to be like him. So what do you think about, number one, the power of your company to introduce technology to our people? Number two, the need for our people to find ways to grab the technology for personal and family and community development and advancement. What are your thoughts?
Well, one of the things I try to do is step into my space and own my business every day. And I think it's really important as for your listening audience to understand that Comcast as an organization is really doing a good job of bridging a digital divide. We want to connect individuals to the internet so that they have the right technology and or information that will be used to be able to continue to grow themselves within their professions and or to get through school. And a couple of things that we're doing I really want to acknowledge is the digital equity program. We work with the Stair Step Foundation, mm-hmm. New Vision Foundation, and the Save All Library System that really focus on bridging that gap. I think it's really important that Comcast continue to do the work, and there's individuals like myself who are out here to help tell the story.
One of the things that I've worked with Comcast on is Internet Essentials, and that's a program that tries to, again, close the digital divide, and it particularly focused at first on families in communities where people were poorer and did not have either access or the equipment to use and to get online. And it addressed that, but then it moved beyond that to also focusing on military people, providing internet access and resources for veterans, and I think for families of military people. I think that's great. Last week I did an interview with members of the Johnnie Baker Post of the American Legion, and they were over at our office, the Marcus Garvey House, for a Facebook Live interview. But I tell you, it was so wonderful to talk to these men, in this case men, who were World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam-era veterans about their experiences and their commitment to serving our country and serving our people. So you guys are supporting that as well. But the Internet Essentials idea is important as an on-ramp to technology. Explain it if you would.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for those that unfortunately don't have the means to the ends to get a level of service that will cost them more financially than their pocketbooks would allow. And so I think it's really an opportunity for those individuals, veterans, as well as, kids who unfortunately don't have the means to be able to get internet access. And, although a sensitive topic, I think it's really important that Comcast is really, on the forefront of being able to provide that along with offering a laptop as a part of the program. And so it gives every kid, every veteran, and then open to the general public an opportunity to really take care of their home and business needs through an online system like Internet Essentials.
I was at an event in St. Paul maybe a couple of months ago. The Tony Santa Foundation had an event where they presented a whole bunch of kids with a laptop and their families with access. And it was another example of the partnering that the Internet Essentials program is doing. What I loved most about, not most, but equally about this was that even the CEO of Comcast West Division came in and actually made their presentations. What's so wonderful about that is that Steve White is a black man, and he's the president of your company. I think that is huge. And so when I think of him, I smile because that just indicates again that the horizon is limitless. So when I talk to a Steve White, and then I look at a Tommy McNeil, I see there's a pathway for you to keep developing, keep growing. With that in mind, how would you advise young black men and women, either young professionals or people in school, to look at career development in general and opportunities in technology in particular?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, Steve White is an individual who, in fact, we all aspire to be like, regardless of his color and his background. But for me, I think what's really important is, Comcast has been a firm believer of developing their people. I've been in leadership, fortunate enough for the past 13 years for Comcast, and through their Comcast University, I've been a part of executive leadership programs as well as being given career opportunities. And what I would suggest, for those that are looking to get into the industry or get into the workforce, is really to find an organization that shares your values. And Comcast does that with me. I would also really suggest that, they focus on their own individual development plan and own their own career. And I think a lot of times we look to others to do that for us. And the last thing I would say is, really, look upon yourself and challenge yourself and be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think as folks are out there, and this is what, Mr. Steve White has really instilled upon us, and really just owning our business. And if individuals who's growing in their particular and respective industry can think along those lines, I think they'll be better off.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest is Tommy McNeil. He's a friend, a young professional. I call him a developing elder, and as a matter of showing respect for his investment in community and his investment in our people. And if you're listening to this or watching it on Facebook Live, if you like this kind of conversation, I invite you to like it and to share it. We're trying to build community using the technology, and Tommy, in fact, is at the center of that technology as an executive with the cable company, Comcast and Xfinity. Tommy, I wanted to ask you your personal story. Where you from, and talk about your mom and your dad and your grands. I want to get a sense of what makes Tommy McNeil.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Really my personal story started off in Chicago. I'm a native. A lot of folks don't know that because I've been out here in Minnesota, which is another place that I call home, for the last 20 years. I'm married with kids. I'm an individual who's a believer. I'm spiritually inclined. I'm well connected socially. I am an individual who really bring resources to the table. I love connecting people and things, which is why Comcast and being a part of this great organization I'm so fond of, is because I get that opportunity outside of my day job to be in environments like this where I can actually not only tell my story, but tell one for the organization as well. My mom lives here. I have 3 brothers. they, in fact, makes it a little bit difficult for my mom to get a date, having four grown boys.
Right.
But, we still working on that. But, I think, it's hard for me to talk about myself because I'm so focused on doing the work and serving others.
Talk about your mom and talk about her parents and your dad's parents. What do you know about them?
Yeah, well, what I can tell you is, I am absolutely my grandparents' children, right? Or a child, I should say. And I think, for me, my grandmother on my father's side would turn 93 on Halloween.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still blessed to have her in my life.
You got good genes.
I do. Well, I'm hoping so.
Yeah.
And so, I'm heading into Chicago this weekend, and I'm going to spend some time with her.
Now, where's her home? Where was she born?
She was born in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Yes. So we had folks migrate from not only Clarksdale, but to Memphis as well as Chicago.
Okay.
So, I have a little bit of Southern roots. And for those that, I do interact with, they'd say I got a little bit of a Southern draw. I can't tell, but that's where my background is.
Do you get down to Clarksdale? Have you been down south?
It's been a while since I've been there. And so it's something that, I know they're looking to throw a family reunion. So I'll plan on attending.
That's where Morgan Freeman's Blues Club is, Clarksdale.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was probably too young to know about any of that stuff, but now I'll be able to hit it up.
Sure. Yeah. You have a sense of your African roots at all, or do you know? Are you curious about your ancestral DNA history?
I am, and and it's interesting you say that, is because as my parents are and unfortunately I lost my father probably 25 years ago. But as my mother is getting older, I'm starting to be more responsible for her. She's starting to get of age now where, the roles have reversed, right? And so now I'm looking to take care of her. And I'm starting to ask more questions, more pointed questions as far as in what does that background really consist of? And so, I challenge anybody that's listening to this call to really, as we are kind of embarking on our age, right? I'm 40 plus. I think it's really important for us to start asking those questions and really get down to, what and where we're from.
Well, listen, Tommy McNeil, I want to thank you so much for being here. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you especially for what you do to connect moms and their sons and dads and their daughters through your after-work activity, you and your colleagues, your friends, Terry.
Yes.
You guys are doing a great job. So keep up the good work. But I really want to thank you for being the professional that you are and shining a light on the possible. By your professionalism, by your consistency as a professional at the Comcast organization, you are saying so loudly and so clearly, this is doable and that we can own this. That's the message. Take ownership. Tommy, thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
All right. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll continue with part 2 of the program momentarily.
on the last night of October, known as the All Hallows Eve.
Hipsters all over town will get dressed up all weird and drink themselves senseless on craft beers. Little kids will be ferried all over the metro area dressed in boring store-bought costumes, begging for cheap sugar flip.
Thus is the tradition. But right here on the KFAI, we will unearth the true spirit of Halloween.
And we will beg you for money to support KFAI, just saying because, fundraiser.
The Night of the Unhallowed Words on October 30th will bring together local writers.
Kid you not, they will actually be here in the studio from 6 p.m. to midnight reading works of horror, discussing horror, and reveling in love of all things horror.
October 30th, 6 p.m. to midnight on KFAI.
Programming on KFAI is supported by you. If your radio is the only thing you still like about your old car, let us help. Instead of trading in your old car for 3 cents on a dollar, donate it to KFAI. You get a tax break, and your old car gets turned into the programs you love. Find out more by calling 855-277-2346 or visiting KFAI.org.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome back to Conversations with Al McFarlane. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, like it, share it, let people know that we're connecting here. Continue with the program. Before I introduce my next guest, sort of an announcement. I'm going to be hosting a town hall meeting on home ownership in partnership with the Home Ownership Alliance. It's going to be November 9th at 10 o'clock a.m. at the North Point Health and Wellness Conference Center. It's in the building that was known as the Thor Building on the corner of Plymouth and Penn. I'll tell you more about that in weeks to come and in Inside News. But it's an important opportunity if you're thinking about moving from being a renter to a homeowner. This is a place to get information, to connect with resources and people, and to find out the ins and outs of starting on the pathway, the journey to wealth creation. I'm continuing now with an interview that I want to thank Steve Jewell for helping me set up. Stephen Jewell is a senior recruiter who for decades has been doing recruiting and human resource work across business and industry sectors. He helped me organize today's program. We met at an event that he organized for, I think it's called the was it Minturn? Minturn, educating Minnesota's recruiters. And it was an event over at Fairview Masonic Hospital. And it brought together thought leaders around the question of the impact of aging workforce trends on Minnesota's employment and employers. And the idea of that event was to discover what recruiters and talent acquisition professionals can do to better present a unique candidate pool to employers. And two of the people that were in that program are here with us in studio today, along with me and Steve. Kate Schaefers is executive director. Dr. Kate Schaefers is executive director of the University of Minnesota Advanced Careers Initiative. She's also the president of AARP Minnesota. Thank you for being here, Kate.
Thrilled to be here.
Chris Farrell. So I call him the legendary Chris Farrell because I've listened to him probably for the last 20 years, 30 years?
Yeah, that's 30 probably sounds about right.
I mean, I've been listening to you for a long time. So when I met you at this event, I didn't act like I was starstruck, but I was. Just so you know it, I'm confessing
it now. Well, it was great to meet you at the event.
It was great to meet you, and it's even greater to have you here to have this conversation. So Chris Farrell is the Marketplace Senior Economics Contributor at American Public Media Group. He's got a new book out. The book is called Purpose and a Paycheck, Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Life. So we're here to talk about that. And I want to ask Steve Jewell to sort of set up the conversation. What are the things that Minnesotans, companies, and individuals, organizations ought to be thinking about as we look at the workforce and the changes in it?
Well, that's a big question, Al. In fact, there's no one short answer to that. I think some larger enterprise companies like Fairview shared about a month ago are doing some innovative behaviors and tactics to engage their existing workforce, engage them to stay longer. Mm-hmm. Again, we have a very low unemployment rate, not just here in the state of Minnesota, but nationally. And so there's a shortage of workers available for the multitude of openings that we have out there. So whether it's Fairview or 3M or Honeywell or General Mill, any of the large enterprises we have in the Twin Cities, they all have workforce planning strategists to talk about how they're going to handle the workforce shortage, not just today, but 5, 10, 15 years from now. The real gap is really in the mid-sized and smaller companies that don't have the resources to get in front of this.
And so what are the trends like? Let me ask Kate to jump in. Speaking from your position with AARP, what are the trends about around older people staying in the workforce longer?
So we know our population is aging and our workforce is aging as well. And so we know that people are working longer. They don't always want that same job, so they're oftentimes looking for other ways to work. But it's good for them to continue to work. It's good for our employers, and it's good for our communities. Work is what fuels a lot of what how people live and work, and so it's a good thing for us.
Is there a downside? I mean, there was this idea the generation or so ago that you got to make it to 55 or 65. Then you go to the golden life of retirement, whether it was golden or not. That was kind of the story that we bought. Is that still the story? Is it still the narrative?
We know how important a sense of purpose is, and for many of us, it comes through our work, whether it is paid or unpaid. And so that continued engagement in something that gives you purpose, that uses your skills, challenges you mentally, as well as creates some structure to your life is also good. And a lot of people also get a lot of social interaction from the workplace. So when you look at social interaction, brain health, being able to continue to earn some money into those later years, it's good for us to continue to work.
Do people experience some kind of a letdown if they change from whatever their professional career might be to something that may be more service or not in the same discipline that they were in, not at the same level they were in? It's almost like volunteer work, but there is some pay. I'm thinking about my dad. My dad worked for Armour's Packing House for 30 years, grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. And then after he retired, 35 years, kind of guy that never missed a day's work, and he'd be almost dead before he would miss work. But that's the kind of work ethic that I think typified a lot of American workers, right? So then when he retired, he maybe stayed retired for a week or two or a month maybe. And then a friend of ours who owned a grocery store, a drugstore, had my dad come in and he helped out. So he's a master mechanic, but now he's doing a little sweep up, little clean up, little cash register, a little advising and talking and greeting and watching in a neighborhood drugstore. And I think our sense was that, and his sense was it was dignified work.
Yeah.
It was appropriate work. So what do you think?
Absolutely. Work is part of our identity. I mean, we see ourselves as workers. It gives us that sense of satisfaction. I mean, we have goals, we accomplish them. So work is good from that perspective. And I also do think, though, that it can shift. Like for your father, he's a great example that he was doing different kind of work, and it maybe wasn't that same level of, that professional craftsmanship. But yet he still got tremendous satisfaction from that. And I think that's the driving factor.
Yeah, and one of the things that has happened
Chris Farrell,
is, if he was getting paid at his previous job, he'd be upset, right? He'd have gone from, a decent pay package to something much, much less.
Right.
So I do think this is important when people shift, they make a change, they're doing something different. Part of that is if you're going to get paid less, you understand the trade-off. You understand that, okay, I'm not doing what I did before, and maybe have a little more flexibility, maybe have a little more time. But it's very difficult in your current job to say, pay me less.
Right. Yeah, you can't do it.
So let me bring that back to the employment process and the recruiting side of this equation. So many recruiters will look at resumes of older candidates and they'll say, you're overqualified. You won't stay in this job. You expect too much money. That's even before they pick up the phone and talk to the candidate. So many candidates are being vetted out of applicant tracking systems or ATS systems because their resume screams one thing when the job that's open screams another. So the challenge for recruiters and the talent acquisition profession as a whole is how to be more inclusive of candidates and consider non-traditional candidates for positions and let the candidate ask the questions, well, is this full-time or three-quarter time? Can I work from home 2 days a week? Do I have the flexibility of a flex start time? So other things become important as you get older beyond a paycheck. Back to Chris's book.
And I also think that we should just not allow management of any organization to say, I can't find the qualified workers that I need. I mean, you've heard this on the radio, you read it in the newspaper, you're watching any business news story. This is what they're talking about. And I think what the three of us are saying is, look, there's a lot of qualified people out there. These are experienced workers, and they want to continue to work. They want to continue to contribute. And you're dealing with these ancient stereotypes. You're dealing with these pernicious stereotypes and saying, oh, you know, they don't want to learn new things, and oh, they're stuck in their ways.
They won't stay.
And they won't stay. And all these things turn out to be absolutely false. We kind of know that among the individuals we know, but there's all this research here in the U.S., around the world, that says, look, if you're creative in your 20s, you're creative in your 60s.
Sure.
And
smarter.
And smarter.
Yeah.
You're a lot smarter.
Yeah.
And experience really does make a big difference. And what you want in your organization is a multi-generational workforce. You want all kinds of people in your workforce. That's what diversity and inclusion means. And so it's a shift among management to change the way they think about experience.
The challenge, in part, is that the perception is that management wanted to replace high cost
That's right.
workers, right? You've been there 25 years and you've gotten some perks and they're a little expensive. And if I squeeze you out, can I bring in a 20-year-old at 1/3 or 1/2 the cost? What is that dynamic?
I think that dynamic is real. What is slightly changing that dynamic is right now, as we're talking, we have the tightest labor market in half a century. And we know that number's a little bit exaggerated because there's still a lot of people discouraged on the sidelines, still coming into the market. Nonetheless, it is a relatively tight labor market. And so what you are starting to see is more and more people looking around. I just want to give one number. I think this is a number that encapsulates a lot of what is so important, what we're talking about. In 2035, which is not that long from now, for the first time in U.S. history, there are going to be more people 65 and older than 18 and under. So if you're going to be a business, you're going to be a nonprofit organization, you're going to be a professional organization, the aging of the workforce is happening, and it's happening now. And so you change your mindset to not, how do I get you out the door as quickly as possible? How do I retain your skills? How to retain your knowledge? Phased retirement, part-time work, flexible work. You still want to be in the full-time pool? Fine, that's great. And you are starting to see more and more organizations, more and more companies starting to think that way. But it has to do, not because they're enlightened, it's this tight labor market.
So I'll add one more wrinkle, and that's speaking as a black man, as an African American. The story about labor shortages has been one where, though black labor was available, institutional prejudices kept black people on the outside. And so companies here, rather than hire in North Minneapolis, would go to the Iron Range and import people, deplete the workforce in rural farm towns and small towns, bring kids in here to work, and keep black men and women who wanted to work and needed to work and who were walking distance from the jobs out of the job force. So that was structural and racist in nature. And so when I attended this event over at Fairview, Steve, the thought I had was, I wonder how this trend impacts our community's ability to really be both diverse and inclusive. Or are we ringing a bell saying we need to bring more Scandinavians in or more, people from other parts of the world, while we keep a pool of people here confined to the margin and in a less than productive situation? Steve, what do you think?
Well, I'll speak to the immigration issue only in that many companies want to hire top-end tech talent. And technology is a growing industry, not just here in Minnesota, but across the country. And we can't get or seem to recruit enough tech talent. We're working on it very hard through Startup Week, and there's tech groups here in town to grow our tech talent. But the challenge is we don't have enough talent in the United States for all the technology jobs we have. So immigration, which is sponsorship of H-1Bs, and others has been diminished to a very small number. So it's a lottery pool for major companies to get technology talent. Our grad schools and our undergrads are not graduating enough STEM graduates in science, technology, engineering, mathematics to fill the needs. So it's got the structural problem as well as institutionalized problem of not enough supply, big demand. Immigration says, but we don't want to have anybody but your brightest come, right? We don't want your, as our president would say, less desirables to come, even though that's a stereotype without any evidence of that. So the challenge is for employers, there's a limited number of immigration lottery tickets, if you will, and so they have to grow their own. So you're seeing more and more employers going out to high schools and recruit with the intent of giving them internships, practicum experiences, shadowing, go through boot camps, if you will, to get them up to speed faster through a homegrown organic system.
To your point, Al, too, AARP has studied this issue and did a survey in 2017 looking at the number of people who have experienced or seen ageism in the workplace. And no surprise, many people over 45, 61% report having seen ageism in the workplace or experiencing it, but we still see those disparities as well. So the highest group that tended to have, they've seen it or experienced it are people of color, women, and those who are unemployed. And so when you look at the challenges, the African American women in particular reported very high rates, 77%. So they're dealing with sexism, ageism, and racism at the same time. And I do think we need to look at not just, how do we bring in immigrant populations, which is needed as well, but also how are we structuring work, and are we putting barriers up to people getting into jobs that are artificial, that are not needed? And I think we need to look holistically at how do we help people move into employment and then move up into organizations so that they can fill those roles.
Chris, do you provide solutions in your book? Do you address this?
It's one of the things that I do address, but as you know, there are no simple solutions. There are no easy answers. Don't want to minimize, the difficulties that anybody is facing. One of the things that I see here and around the country is a greater emphasis on entrepreneurship, that and providing resources to support the entrepreneur. So there are these ecosystems. META in Minneapolis, probably one of the standouts. But there are other organizations. The Glenn Nelson Center in St. Paul is really reaching out to minorities and to bring them into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So there seems to be a shift going on toward entrepreneurship. And I think entrepreneurship is one of the really important ways, because one of the stunning numbers that's out there is in 2017, 26% of new entrepreneurs were the 55 to 64-year-old age group. Now, part of that is you reach a certain age, you have skill, you have knowledge, you have experience. So many people, you have a dream, maybe you want to start a business. But the other thing is if you lose your job at age 60, getting another job that you're really going to be happy with can be really hard. And so something that provides that purpose and paycheck can be an entrepreneur. I think that's what you're now seeing there's always been entrepreneurship in the minority communities, but I think there's more resources going in to support that activity. And so that sort of has such a long way to go, but it's one of the more optimistic stories in our community is surrounding entrepreneurship and self-employment.
And I think we're also looking at that in rural communities as well. The Initiative Foundation is one organization that's trying to help entrepreneurs in rural communities because we know that we want to keep our rural communities healthy.
That's a challenge.
I'd like to just add there's a gig economy that has been here for quite some time. And by gig economy, I mean the subcontracted labor. You go through a large recruiting house, and they send you out to an employer, and they mark up the rate by 40%. And you're not an employee of the employer, you're an employee of the contracting firm. And that's been a growing industry in the staffing world, to have staff augmentation, what they call it staff augmentation, where you go to work for somebody else who's paying your check. But that contract could be 3 weeks, 3 months. It's rarely 3 years. So you don't have the longevity. They may or may not offer benefits with that contract. But it takes the liability away from the employer, because then they can grow and contract as their business demands need it. And you'll see that across America, but surely here in Minneapolis, there are a number of firms that hire contractors. I'm a contractor. I'm actually working for somebody on contract. Very common.
Okay. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane, my guest in studio. You just heard the voice of Steve Jewell. He's a senior recruiter who's worked with recruiting and human resource work in business and in industry, and who also helped me produce today's show. Also with Steve, Chris Farrell, the Marketplace Senior Economics contributor at American Public Media Group and author of the relatively new book, Purpose and a Paycheck, Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Life. Also, Kate Schaefers is here. She's Executive Director of the University of Minnesota Advanced Careers Initiative and President of Minnesota AARP. So it seems like we're talking about something happening at both ends of the spectrum, where my concern, what I have articulated, is the opportunity for people of color, the marginalized. And I have articulated a skepticism or an angst about what I described as institutional and cultural structural barriers that are race-based. Then you are explaining that the same dynamics are affecting everybody else based on age. And Kate, we know that as a class, women have experienced the same thing. And then we have to say, well, you know what, people from the LGBTQ communities, so all of us have experienced and are experiencing being marginalized in some way. And this conversation, and ones like it around the country, and ones like it in industry, seem to effectively bring awareness and a discussion towards solving problems at the edges, moving them towards the center, because the edges end up being the new center as time goes on. Does that make sense, Chris?
It makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really what is going on here. This is part of a much broader civil rights movement. And, part of what we're saying is one of the things I've been convinced of when I travel around the country and I talk to people, that there's a whole group of people who believe you go from 60 to 90 in 1 year. That's all it takes, right? And, what we're saying is, look, people in their 60s, their 70s, 80s, they have a lot to contribute. Yeah. They have a lot to contribute to our society. Many of them as workers, many of them as entrepreneurs, but also as volunteers, as mentors, all kinds of things. But they really have something to contribute. But it's the same story when you're talking about gender, about race. It's about making a valued contribution to our society and our economy. And it's not that people can't do that. It's about being given the opportunity to do it. Because earlier I'd said, if you're creative in your 20s, you're creative in your 60s. So then the question becomes, in your 60s, are you given the opportunity in the workplace to be creative? If there's a challenge, there's a problem, are you on the team that's assigned to solve that challenge or that problem? Or are you just considered too old?
And just like other biases, some of it's implicit. So we don't necessarily think about that. It just comes automatically. And so we have to, as a society, put an interruption there and just stop some of those bias assumptions that tend to limit who is seen as possible for jobs.
Kate, I would say that sits squarely in the human resource shoulders. One of the challenges that HR should have, as well as talent acquisition, is to bring evidence, empirical evidence, fact-based information to the management, to leadership, to say, you're working off old assumptions, you're working off of stereotype, off of anything but facts. So let's deal with facts. And as recruiters, we're chartered with bringing market data to the organization and say, here's what this job pays, here's what's in demand, here's what candidates are telling us, so that we can make good decisions, not just based on 1970 mindset or 1990 mindset, but 2020 mindset. And I think that's part of the HR challenge, part of the talent acquisition challenge, is to really lead instead of follow.
One of those examples, how many of us have sat in a meeting and someone goes, can't remember her name. I'm having a senior moment.
Oh, me?
Now we have all sat in that meeting.
Yeah.
We've all sat in that
Sure.
meeting, and I think that should be banned, right? Because the fact of the matter is, if you're a young parent, you forget everything,
Right.
including your keys. I can't find the car keys because you're running around and hustling. So we all suffer from that, but it's a common thing. It happens all the time, and nobody really thinks about it. And yet, think about the stereotype that you're giving about an older person.
Terminology, he's long in the tooth. What does that mean to be long in the tooth?
Right.
He's in the sunset of his career. I mean, the curtain is coming down. The
So
fat
then-
lady hasn't sung yet. I mean, we have all kinds of euphemisms for
Yeah.
old age and aging, but rarely is it fact-based. It's mostly history.
Well, and I work with Professor Phyllis Moen at the University of Minnesota. She's a sociologist, and she's been doing a lot of research on this as a new life stage. So she says that we have opening up in front of us what she calls encore adulthood. It is a time of life that is after the career building years, but before frailties of old age. And we don't have good terminology to describe it. We just lump everyone, as Chris said, you 60 to 90 is one category. And just like adolescence, we invented to describe teenagers who were not quite children, but they're not quite adults, and we all know that. She says that we've got a new life stage here, and people will continue to work through that stage. We need new language, and we need new models and new pathways.
I tell people, Chris, that I turned 72 at my last birthday in September, and I said that recently I announced that I intend to retire on my birthday in 2034. And so that throws people for a little loop, But that's what my intention is. They say, and this is back to euphemisms, God willing and the creek don't rise, as they say, right? Yeah. But that's my intent. You have to have a plan and an idea. And my thinking is that I want to continue the work that I'm doing now, sort of take this career that I'm in, where it will go, but I have a new career in mind from 2034 to my centenary in 2047. So there is a plan.
Yeah.
What's the message? The message is you have to begin to see the value that you bring. I tell people, I tell myself, first of all, that everything up to now has been practice.
Yes. Yeah.
And now the work begins. So I'm now, in my mind, prepared at last to do this work. Preparation means understanding that I'll be always learning, that I'll never have learned at all, that I'll still be gaining experience, insights, and knowledge on this path, but that I'm comfortable with that, and I'm able to connect and share and grow and give in the process. That's what I think. What do you think?
I think that's the ideal. I mean, I think that's what we're all striving for. So I turned 66 on Saturday, and and it's still this, curious and learning and wanting to talk to people, being in a conversation with the three of you. I mean, and learning all this stuff, and it's just so engaging. And so I think that, and it doesn't matter what you do. That's what you're always looking for, is something. Why am I getting up in the morning? Why am I putting my feet on the ground? Why am I getting dressed? And there's this wonderful book written by Studs Terkel back in the 1970s. It's called Working. And except for Pauline Kael, who wrote for the New Yorker, it's it's a different era. Elevator operator and all that, that kind, the secretary. And in the introduction, and I just would recommend for everybody to read the introduction, he said what everybody he talked to, they talked about how hard life is and bad bosses and the disappointments, and yet everybody wanted more from life and from their job than a paycheck. They wanted more than, he called it, their daily bread. They wanted that meaning. They wanted that purpose. And so this is not a luxury. We're talking about purpose. What you're talking about is not a luxury. It's the essence of who we are. It's the essence of what we are. And so that search is to be applauded, it's to be supported, and it doesn't end just because you hit some chronological age.
And I'd like to also add that, Al, I think you bring much more to what you're doing today than you would have sitting here at 20.
Absolutely.
And so you're bringing wisdom, you're bringing insights, and so we also need, as a society, to appreciate what you're bringing. And maybe the way you work may be different in the next 15, 20 years, but you're still contributing what we need.
And so I think about, we raised the question of immigrants, of immigration and the impact on workforce. But as we move forward, the question of immigration, I think, disappears because the boundary of existence will disappear. The things we know as boundaries now, nation states, I think, will have less consequence in future, and the capacity to collaborate with individuals, organizations, institutions globally will emerge, I think, as new methods to create community and to exchange goods and services, transactions, but also to benefit all participants, and not on a model of scarcity, but on a model of reciprocity that is more fair and more enabling and less destructive and less punitive.
And Al, I think you're hearing that from millennials and Gen Zs as well. They are much more inclusive. They're much more tolerant, much more embracing than, say, a boomer generation or older. So there is this younger generation that sees the value of diversity and inclusion.
I was recently, and thanks for bringing this with you, Steve, awarded one of 50 over 50, a project that is AARP and Pollen, Minnesota, I think, produced this event maybe 5 years in now, 6 years in?
4 years.
4 years in.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
I've gotten lots of great feedback, and I'm glad to have been nominated by family members, but selected by the committee. And I'll be adding my recommendations for next year. It's a way of building community. People that I know, some I didn't know, but wanted to meet, and so it's really a cool thing. But the proposition of celebrating people over 50 is a great proposition. Why is that a real deal for AARP?
You know, what we've been talking about is a lot of the stereotypes around you're done when you get older, when you pass 50. And what we want to do is disrupt that idea, to show that we have vibrant people in our community, some of them known. Chris Farrell also won that award last year. Some of them unknown. And we want to sing their praises and give some visibility to the important work that's happening in community. So this is why we're doing it. We're wanting to show our community that, look around, we've got some amazing people, and you're great role models for all of us.
Kate, I love personal stories. Take a minute and give me the 1 minute Kate Schaefer story. Where are you from? And
Chicago.
Who are your parents?
South side of Chicago, actually. My mother, Italian. My dad, Irish. Grew up in Chicago, came here in my early 20s, and have been here since.
And looking back through the family tree, what out of your family lineage resides in you in ways that drive your thinking, that you feel as you breathe every day?
You know, it's interesting because with our University of Minnesota Advanced Careers, we have fellows, and part of our process is we tell our story, because it's so helpful to look back on where you've come from and what has shaped you. And I actually did mine last week, so and this is perfect.
Question,
But one of the things that really shaped me was this sense of community. So my father was sick almost the whole time I was growing up. There were 7 kids in our family. We were very low income, but our community came together for us and found us jobs, did a benefit for us. I mean, our community came together. And while my siblings and I will say, we didn't have much money, I think we felt very resilient, and I think that made a huge difference. So I think that's what shaped me, trying to build strong community.
And Chris, what about you? What's your family story?
So my dad was Irish Catholic. My mom was Protestant. To get married, my mom had to agree that we'd be raised in the Catholic Church. And I never have a place where I can say I'm from, because we were military, then shipping. So we did that move every 2-3 years, lived in Guam, lived in Germany, lived in California. I thought I lived in the heart of the Midwest when we lived in Toledo, Ohio, until I moved here, and people look at me and go, that's the East Coast?
You're east of there, yeah, right, yeah.
But mostly that New York, Washington corridor.
Okay. And generationally, your mom and dad moved you, military family, but in history, how do you wear and use your sense of genealogy in your day-to-day life, if you do?
Sort of 2 ways. One is that, my dad really was committed to make things better. I mean, that always was important to him in little ways. And for example, just to give one, he would never work for a non-union company, because during World War II, those were the people, I'm quoting from, those were the people that fought. So therefore they deserve a good wage. And in shipping, you can be paid a very low wage if you're non-union. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. And so it was always a strong sense about giving back and of service. And that was something I grew up with. And then it was just interesting. I talked to my mother. She's 94 years old. We're very lucky. She's very healthy, mentally there. And talking about her family, and so linking back to the 19th century and building the railroads, and how no one was actually that educated, but everyone was highly skilled. And so they would do all kinds of different jobs, always using skill. And that's something of what we grew up with, is that you're going to always work and you're always going to contribute. And hopefully you also make this world a better place.
Steve Jewell, jump in. What's your family story?
Very quickly, I'm a Duluth kid. Spent the first 25 years in Duluth and have a strong connection to that town to this day. I still have family up there. Ironically, this last weekend, I spent my 19th year with my family. We call it Friends and Family at Breezy Point. And we gather for a weekend of celebration and hugs and games and silliness. We have costume night, and we stay at the Fawcett House. 19 years we've been doing this. I was a young man when I started doing this. So my aunt, the oldest, the matriarch of the group, said, "You kids are going to have to carry this on." And it's like, we're 61. You mean you kids?
Right.
I'm not sure who she's talking to, but we had 30-plus family members there. I guess for me, it says I still think of Duluth as home. I still have connections to that. But working class, I think the common theme of blue-collar, tradesmen. I was the first to go to college, first to go on to secondary ed, first one to travel. So I look at being on the shoulders of my family.
European roots.
Absolutely.
What part?
Irish, German, English.
So McFarlane is my name.
Scottish, right?
Irish.
Is it Irish?
Irish,
Okay.
well, Irish and Scottish.
Okay.
And so I'm interested in the connection between black people and Irish people, black people and Scottish, because we get our name through Irish who came to Jamaica. And that's where my father's line comes from. My mother, I've written this, grew up in Mississippi, and when she came to Kansas City, worked for a dry goods store, so she learned to speak Yiddish. And so I have this kind of lineage story that talks about a mom who is African. We did DNA, and my mother's side, 99% Yoruba from Nigeria, but speaking Yiddish. And my dad's side, actually born in Cuba, raised in Jamaica, his parents, though, from Jamaica, and named McFarlane, right? Cuban McFarlanes, Jamaican McFarlanes. But it makes for interesting storytelling and interesting exploration, because at the end of the day, I think that the future offers us all an opportunity to connect with who we were in ancient times and from then to now, but also to forge new possibilities, new relationships that recognize our individual and collective dignity, humanity, the sovereignty of every soul, right? And the potential for every life to be fulfilled and fulfilling and sharing. That's what I think. And guess what? We're out of time. I want to thank all of you for being here. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, Al. Thank you.
My guest, Kate Schaefers, Executive Director, University of Minnesota Advanced Careers Initiative, President of Minnesota AARP, Chris Farrell, Marketplace Senior Economics Contributor at American Public Media Group, author of Purpose and a Paycheck, Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Life, and who helped me organize today's show, Steve Jewell. Steve is a senior recruiter who's for decades worked in progressive recruiting and human resource fields, both for business and industry. And Steve, you are also working to help promote this idea of the Career Force.
Career Force is a great resource in town. It's the revamped of Hired. Steve Groves came in from Google on the West Coast to take over the commissioner role at Deed, and he's shaking things up. He's trying to consolidate, streamline, and make Career Force resources for people, not just in job transition, but for everybody. So take a look into Career Force.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Al.
All right. Here we go.
The Cedar Cultural